Welcome back. It is time to jump into part 2 of your Design Your Jeep build. In part 2 of this training, we are working on understanding axles and gears for your build, as well as how your tire size is your build platform, and that is going to dictate what upgrades and modifications you're going to need to make. One, we did a very basic where to start to get to know your Jeep. I hope you took the time to work through your My Jeep Specs worksheet. And there are so many pieces to it and so many parts. I know sometimes it can get overwhelming, but I hope you took that time to get to know your Jeep better, find out about your Jeep, and now you have all the specs for your Jeep ready for you as we get started working forward in part 2 today. So what I have done is gone absolutely all the way back to basics. We have broken this up step by step, and we're going to go slow and in depth into each piece. So by the end, you're going to have a really good understanding of what your dream build is going to be, and so that you don't make the mistakes of having to go back and rebuild your Jeep multiple times. And that's something we're going to be talking about today as we focus on understanding your axles and gears. Okay, let's jump right into part 2 of the Design Your Jeep build, and we're talking tires, axles, and gears. So I know some of you ladies might be asking, why are we not just jumping into lifts and tires? And I know a lot of people want to start with lifts and tires, but remember, this is a process, and we have a methodical approach to this program. So tire size is the most important part to deciding your build. It's going to dictate all the other parts and the modifications that you're going to make. But we're going to start today by focusing in on the tire size. So when deciding on your build, your tire size will determine a lot. So knowing and understanding where your Jeep is right now and what you will have to change based on what your current specs are, so that way today we're talking about how your tire is going to affect your axles and gears and what changes you'll have to make based on where your specs are right now. So the tire size really is a big component, and you build everything around that tire size. So once you have decided on your tire size platform, then we start from the bottom and work our way up. As we are getting started today, there are 3 things I want you to remember. The first thing is your Jeep build is for you. It's not for anyone else, and you have to love it, and it is ultimately your decision on this build. So the second thing that I want you to remember is there is no rush to do a build. The slower the process and the longer you wait to design and think through your build, the better idea and plan you're going to have. So there is never a rush or a deadline to getting your Jeep built. So the third thing that I want you to remember is you do not have to do the entire build and all of your modifications all at once. A build is a process, and you can do pieces and parts as you go so that you can break it up over time. And this helps to be able to financially save, put the money into the parts that are worth putting the extra money into so that you're making the upgrades that you really want to be making. So why is it important to understand this piece right now? Well, we need to determine what you actually have right now, what gears are you going to be able to run, and what gears are you going to be limited to. So know what gears you have right now in your axle, so that way you can understand the tire size that you can run right now, what those specs are, but then you're also going to understand what changes you're going to need to make if you're going to be running a bigger tire size. And this enables you to be able to make the most educated decision on designing your build that you can, with the understanding of the upgrades and modifications that you will need to make. So know your axles. Hopefully you were able to fill out your Jeep spec sheet. So now you know what axles you have. If you have a Dana 30, a Dana 35 rear, a Dana 44, or a Dana 60. So knowing your axle is really important for what we're talking about today. I also want to start, as we're jumping into this, to let you know, sometimes I call it hashtag hard truth, but what I am laying out for you ladies is the absolutely best, highest quality build that you can make for longevity. So it's going to save you money in the long run, because you're not going to have to go back, fix things that break, rebuild. It's going to be the very best that you can have. So for that reason, I'm going to be very honest, and sometimes, like I call it, hashtag hard truth, I'm going to tell you the absolute best way to set your Jeep up so that you're going to have the ultimate success and you're going to have the best build that you can have. So what I want to talk about really quickly, I gave this to you in class number 1, but a quick overview as we were talking axles. So the CJ generation came stock with a Dana 30 front and an AMC rear. These are stock specifications. So if your Jeep has had aftermarket upgrades done to it, it may no longer have these stock factory axles in them, but I want to share with you what came stock so you know if there's been no modifications made to your Jeep. So the YJ generation came with a Dana 30 front and a Dana 35 rear. The TJ/LJ came with a Dana 30 front and a Dana 35C rear, unless you got the Rubicon. If you got a Rubicon, you had a Dana 44 front and a Dana 44 rear. In the JKU generation, it was a Dana 30 front and a Dana 44 rear. Unless you got the Rubicon, then you have a Dana 44 front and a Dana 44 rear. In the JL generation, they have the 3rd generation axles. So in the Rubicon, they are a 3rd generation Dana 44 wide axle, front and rear. Then the stock Jeeps came with, or I'm sorry, the other model Jeeps came with the 3rd generation axle that is really going to kind of be equivalent to a Dana 30 spec for the front end and comparable to the Dana 44 rear. So if you have a JL generation, you came with stock off the factory store, out of the store. It came with that 3rd generation new Dana axle, but it is going to be comparable so that your front axle would be comparable to a Dana 30 and your rear would be comparable to a Dana 44, as we are talking about all the different specs for today. So when you're talking about going to a lift in tires, you need to know your gears. However, gears and axles go hand in hand. So we're going to be talking about that relationship today of the axle and the gear first. So we're talking about how they go together. So when you talk about your tires, your tire size is going to also play a part in this based on the axle and the gears that you have, and then the upgrade that you will need to make for the axle and the gear to be able to have a good solid based build based on that tire size. And I know this can be a confusing part, but we're going to break it down. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with a little bit of an overview. So again, this is where I'm going to lay this out to be the very best long-term build that it can be. So you're going to save money and not have to go back and redo something that you've already done. So I am also going to give you a little bit of hard truth as we're talking about what gear options you have based on the axle that you have. There are lots of opinions on this. I understand that, but I'm setting you up for the most success that you can have. So in this section, you see that I talk about the Dana 30, the Dana 44, the Dana 60, and then we do talk about the Dana 35 rear end, and then we talk about upgrades for the Dana 60 to go to a 1-ton. I did not in this section go into detail in the advanced build, like going into the 1-ton and the 2.5-ton Rockwells. That is going to be in the advanced build section, which is coming soon. So today we're focusing on more of a traditional build for a daily driver that can be off-road capable. If you're looking for more information on the 1-ton and the 2.5-ton Rockwell upgrades for more of a trail rig, that is coming soon in the advanced section. But so in this piece, you're going to have the most opinions, but I'm trying to lay this out for you to have the most success long term. So I want to explain first that the information that I'm sharing with you ladies is really trying to give you the best information and the best quality build so that you're going to be really happy. So with that said, I'm going to kind of be falling in the middle. So I'm being conservative on what I'm laying out for you guys, but I'm not being so conservative or kind of so open to all the ideas on the other end. I'm trying to fall right in the middle. So you're going to have longevity of your parts and your Jeep. The Dana 30. So we're going to talk about the Dana 30 and gears. So when we start to talk about re-gearing, what I want you to think about is in the Dana 30, quality is the goal. So you're not going to have to go back and continuously rebuild things, change things, which in turn is going to make it cost more for your build because I want to save you money. So when you did your spec sheet on your Jeep, if you have a Dana 30, the gear options that you're going to have in your Dana 30, when you go to re-gear, and again, I'm being conservative for a long-term longevity, is you can re-gear to a 373, a 410, or a 456 gear. The Dana 30, if you have a JKJKU generation, they came stock with the 7.73 or the 321. So it's all going to depend on what model and what make you have. So hopefully you have your specs in front of you. But the next step is knowing what you can re-gear to. So given your current axle for longevity. So the carrier and differential housing is different based on the axle itself. So this is why we're talking about the recommendations that we are for the gears based on the axle itself. So with the Dana 30, the max that you really should re-gear to is the 456. Again, there is a lot of opinions on this, ladies, and some people are going to say, no, 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 no. You could run a 488 with a Dana 30, and you can, and you probably could, but how long is it going to last and how long is it going to hold up is really going to be the question. So when we're talking about re-gearing options, you really don't want to re-gear a Dana 30 to anything more than a 456 because ultimately I don't want you to have to go back and redo anything for a second time. Understanding how the gears and re-gearing works is crucial. So we go in depth on the differentials and like how the gears themselves work in this series, but in this gear ratio number, what I want you to understand is as the number gets bigger, so if you're talking about re-gearing from a 321 to a 410, as the number gets bigger, the gear itself, so the pinion gear itself is getting smaller. So it's the same thing on any of the size axle. So it doesn't matter what axle you have, as the number of the gear gets bigger, so a 410 to a 456, the bigger the number gets, the smaller that the gear itself is going to be. So the pinion gear is getting smaller as the number is getting bigger. So the difference is, though, as the axle number gets larger, so as you're talking about going from a Dana 30 to a Dana 44 to a Dana 60, as that axle number gets larger, the actual size of the gears gets bigger. So because it's a different differential, it's a different housing, it's a different case. So what happens is, as the axle gets bigger, the actual size of the gear is bigger. So a 410 gear is a 410 gear because this is a ratio that we're talking about. It's a gear ratio. So if you have a Dana 30 and you put in a 410 gear, and you have a Dana 44 and you put in a 410 gear, it's still a 410 ratio gear. So it functions the same. The difference is going to be the actual size of the gears, and the pinion gear is going to be different. So in the Dana 30, the pinion gear, the gears themselves are going to be smaller. So the 410 gear in the Dana 30 is smaller, like the gear size, than in a Dana 44. It's larger, and a Dana 60, it's even larger. What does that mean? So what that means, as we're talking about, the gear itself starts out bigger in the larger number axle. So if you're thinking about that, as the gear size gets bigger, the pinion gear gets smaller. As the axle size gets bigger, the actual size of the gear gets bigger. So what that is going to mean is, as we were just comparing the 410 gear and the Dana 30, the size itself of the pinion gear and the gears are going to be smaller than in a Dana 44. So if you now have a larger gear, so let's say you do regear and you have a 456 in your Dana 30 and a 456 in a Dana 44, but the size of the pinion gear has gotten smaller, but since the Dana 44, the gear is actually bigger, you have a bigger surface. So if you think about all of these axles, as the gear size gets bigger, the pinion gear, the gears themselves are getting smaller, so smaller equals weakness. So that's what I want you to understand as we're talking about re-gearing. So now we're talking about how that converts to understanding your build. So as you're talking about re-gearing, so you're thinking about the actual tubing size also gets larger as the axle size gets bigger. So if you're thinking about, you're getting a bigger, stronger axle as that number goes up. So the Dana 30, then the Dana 44 has a larger axle tubing. It's a larger axle itself. Then the Dana 60 is even bigger than the Dana 44. So when you're talking about the strength of the axle itself, the number, as it goes up, the axle itself is getting stronger because there's more material. You have a bigger axle tubing size. That means you can put more stress, more pressure. It's going to take a little bit more abuse, for lack of a better word, as those numbers get bigger. So when we're talking about how that is in your build, this is why we're talking about limiting what size gear you're going to re-gear based on the axle. Because as that gear size gets smaller and smaller and smaller, that is where your weakest point is going to be. So you really don't want to re-gear a smaller axle with a large gear, because the gears themselves, the pinion gear, is going to be so small that is going to become your weakest point in your axle. So we are setting you up to have a strong build that is going to last forever. Now we're going to move into the Dana 44. If you have a Dana 44, your gear options are going to be that you can re-gear to a 373, a 410, which most of the Rubicons all have 410 gears. Does not matter the generation. You can re-gear to a 456, a 488, and a 513. So again, as we kind of talked about limitations to keep in mind for longevity and long-term function, you start to push that higher end of these gears on the Dana 44 with a 513. So can you have a Dana 44 and run a 513 gear in it? Well, the answer is yes, you can. But again, how long is that really going to hold up? Now let's talk about the Dana 60. So the Dana 60 is going to be an aftermarket upgraded axle. This is not anything that is going to come stock or factory. This is an aftermarket upgrade that has been made to your Jeep. Because when you start talking about the Dana 60, most of the times you're talking about doing a 1-ton setup. So you're going to 1-ton axles. So that is when you start hearing about the Dana 60. If you are going to do a 1-ton build, you're going to ton out your Jeep. Keep in mind on the Dana 60 rear. So a Dana 60 front is a 1-ton axle. The Dana 60 rear axle, you're still going to need to get an aftermarket axle, such as a Pro Rock Dana 60 or an upgraded aftermarket Dana 60 rear, so that you get to achieve that 1-ton. A lot of people will go to a 14-bolt rear end when they go to a 1-ton setup as well. So most of the time, you don't see a Dana 60 setup in a Jeep, unless you're going to be running like 40-inch tires or bigger, or it is a dedicated trail rig. So when we start talking about re-gearing the Dana 60, you can re-gear a 410, a 456, a 488, a 513, and a 538. So now we are jumping over to the Dana 35 rear. So this is something you saw in the YJ, TJ, and LJ. And when we start talking about kind of controversy about different things, the Dana 35 rear end is one of those as well. So some people say that they'll run forever. Some people, and majority of the people, are going to tell you that you have to swap out and that you're going to have issues with the Dana 35. Some people love them. Some people swear by them. But our suggestion is going to be, if you have a YJ, TJ, LJ that has the Dana 35 rear and you want to be doing an upgraded build, you're going to re-gear, you're going to run bigger tires, instead of putting the money into doing a truss on a Dana 35 and then you're doing all these upgrades, in the long run, it is going to be less expensive to go ahead from the very beginning and start your upgrade and either do an 8.8 rear end or a Dana 44 or Chrysler 8 1/4 rear. So those are kind of your options when you start talking about if you're doing a big build, you're doing upgrades, you have the Dana 35. Yes, you can trust them and re-gear them and they're going to run for a while, but the consensus, and from what I have seen down the road, if you're going to be doing trail riding with your Jeep, this is something you want to go ahead and start as your upgrade at the very beginning. Now, if this is going to be more of a daily driver, you're going to be doing kind of moderate, easy trails, then you're not going to be putting as much stress on the components. This is going to last longer. So I'm just kind of laying it out there. I'm sharing with you the way that I would do things and the opinions from my experiences that I have had and what I have seen work and what I have seen not work. So I'm just trying to explain that to you. Again, this is one of our hashtag hard truths. I want you to be set up for success and the best build possible from the very beginning. And now we are going to jump in to deciding tire size based on axles and gear. So now we are kind of talking about putting everything together. So this is why knowing your specs was important. You know what axle you have. You know what gears you can run in the current axle that you have to have the most longevity for your build. So now we're going to be talking about how that equivalates to your tire. So if you've already picked your tire build platform, that is going to be helpful as well, because then you're going to understand what changes you're going to have to decide on as we were talking about how these all work together. So in this picture, these are 42-inch sticky tires. And I always think it's funny, they don't look that big in pictures, but they look much bigger in person. So we're going to follow the chart to set yourself up for the best quality and to be the happiest long term with your Jeep. And again, I am stressing long term here, ladies. You know there are lots of opinions, again, on tire size, axle, and gear ratio. And you can do things and run things short term and run them for a little while. But in this section, when we're talking about this, long term, at some point, you're going to have to make the decision to either like axle swap or re-gear based on the build that you're going to decide on. So now is where it gets a little tricky. So sometimes you're going to hear people say, well, I'm going to run 35s now, and then I'm going to upgrade to get 37s, and you know, I don't know. So take the time, and we talked about this in section 1, to really get clear on what tire size you want to run. So if you're thinking that you may possibly want to run a 37, but you're thinking, you know, I think I'm going to start with a 35, my suggestion is always do your build and your modifications based on what the largest tire size platform you could want would be. Because what I don't want to see you do is build to a 35. So re-gear for your 35-inch tires, do your build, and then a year or two down the road, you're like, man, you know what? I love this. I'm having so much fun. I'm going to put 37s on. And then you have to go back and re-gear again to change that for 37s, upgrade different parts and pieces. So just think about, as we're talking about this right now, deciding on your tires, always build to the bigger platform. So if you want 33s right now, but you think you might go to a 35, do your build for your 35, because you can always run a smaller tire size without having to change anything. So you could do your build for a 35, but keep your Jeep on 33s. And a year or two down the road, if you decide you want to put 35s on, you're already set up for that. So if there is that chance, make sure you build to that. And I'll share really quickly with you on my JKU build. So I have done my build sheet. I've laid everything out. My end build is a 37. So I'm building to a 37-inch tire platform. But what I am doing right now is I'm running 35s as I am doing the pieces to the build. So I have done some upgrades. I have 35s on my Jeep right now, but all the pieces I'm adding and the modifications that I'm doing are for the 37-inch tire platform build, so that when everything is done, I can take off my 35s, put my 37s on, and then I have made it to my ultimate build platform. Now we are moving into the chart. So this is putting all three together. So we already talked about what, based on your axle, what your gear choices are going to be. So now we are talking about tire size. So now we're moving into, based on the tire size, what is the minimum gear that you're going to need, and what is your axle options based on your tire size. So the bigger your tires get, that's more weight that you're putting on the Jeep, and that is a much bigger tire that you are asking stock parts and pieces to be able to turn. There's so many different things that factor into that, but I want you to be thinking the bigger the tire, the more modifications that you're going to have to make to accommodate that, because you're putting more stress on stock pieces. So we're going to go ahead and talk about tire size, minimum gear, and axle options. So So if you are going to stay stock, your minimum gear that you want is a 321, and you can run a Dana 30 or a Dana 44. If you're going to go to a 33-inch tire, the minimum gear that you're going to want is a 373. Your axle options are going to be the Dana 30 or the Dana 44. If you're going to run 35s, the minimum gear that you're going to want is a 410, and you can do that with a Dana 30 or a Dana 44. I'm being a little conservative on this, so I'm right in the middle, but these are the minimum gears you're going to want based on the tire size. When you hit that 37-inch tire and above line, that is when things really start to change and to shift, because that is a much larger tire that you are putting on your Jeep build. So for 37s, the minimum gear you're going to want is a 456. And at 37s, you need to make sure that you're running a Dana 44. For 40s, your minimum gear is a 488, and you need to be with a Dana 44 or a Dana 60. When you start talking about anything 42s and above, you need a 513 gear and a Dana 60 or an aftermarket upgraded axle. So again, we're not going really into the 1 ton and the 2.5 ton builds in this section. At that point, you're talking about kind of trail rigs. So that is going to be in the advanced build section that is coming soon. But for your rear axles, so that is for your front axles. For your rear axles, the Dana 35 upgrade to an 8.8 rear end or a Dana 44 or a Chrysler 8 1/4 is going to be our recommendation. The Dana 60 rear is a 3/4 ton axle. So you want an aftermarket built Dana 60 like a Pro Rock Dana 60, or go to a 14-bolt rear end when you start talking about the 1 ton rear end. So you can kind of see where the dividing line is. So 37s, you need to make that step up to the Dana 44. And at 42s, you need to make that step up to the 1 ton. Most people start to do a 1 ton build at 40s. So that's something to think about. And really anything 42s and above, you will see either the Dana 60, so the 1 ton, or you'll start to see people go to the 2.5 ton Rockwell build as well. So I hear this question all the time as we're talking about Jeep builds. How many things do I have to upgrade on the rest of my Jeep for my build? So we are going in depth into that through this entire course and in each of the sections. But the easiest rule of thumb to really think about in the answer to this is the bigger the tire size, the more you're going to have to upgrade. So the bigger the tire, the more parts and pieces that you're going to be upgrading, because you're having to replace stock parts. Because if you think about it, you know, there was somebody who designed all the parts, the pieces, and the mechanics of the Jeep to really perform at that kind of stock platform where it is. And it functions and it works wonderfully. So as we start to change that, by changing the tire size we're putting on, we are putting all this stress and force on stock parts and pieces that were never meant to run a tire that big. So my answer for this is the bigger the tire, the more upgrades for all the different stock parts and pieces that you're going to have to make. So I just want to say that I am breaking down everything into little pieces, and I'm trying to do short sections so that I'm not going to do everything all at once, because I don't want you to get overwhelmed and I don't want to give you too much information all at once. That's why I recommend doing one section at a time and not trying to work through all of these pieces all at once, so that you're retaining all the information that you are learning. So in our next section, we're going to be working on, we're going to section 3, which is stock fenders and aftermarket fenders and bumper options. So we're talking fenders and bumpers. So my homework for you is to take the time and think hard, go back and forth, ask yourself the questions, and I did it for quite a while of back and forth. Ask yourself what size tire you really want to decide on building your platform around. Now that you have a little more information and understanding of where you are right now, so what axle you have, what gears you have, what tire you can run now that you can see the tire, the gear, and the axle together, how they all work together. So what size tire do you want to run, and what changes is that going to mean you need to make? Now, you can do a 37-inch tire build and have currently like the 321 gears and a Dana 30. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do that. Just understand that means you're going to be changing out more pieces and what you're going to re-gear to, and just knowing and having that information so you're making the educated decision and nothing is going to be a surprise. So what I wanted to also let you know is you have downloads available underneath this section. If you scroll down, it'll say downloads. You have the Jeep Build Overview, and you also have the overview by tire size platform. So what both of these are going to do is to help to show you the axle, the gear, the tire size ratio, the chart, and then also in the overview by tire size platform, it is going to tell you what you're going to upgrade. So when you get to that download, or if you're following along in your course manual, if you have a line, it means you don't need to do it. If it's recommended, it means we recommend you think about doing that and maybe put it on the long-term upgrade list. And if it says yes, then that is something that we recommend or say that you need to do based on your tire size for your build. And also make sure you use your note sheets, especially right now, the tire size notes is a great one for this section. So thank you. I'm so excited, and I will see you in the next section.